離地新聞，逢星期四晚6點半，離地民主後援見。
好，第二節嘅離地新聞，大家好，我係 Titus。今日我哋嘅兩名嘉賓咧，分別係咧呢個Macdonald-Laurier Institute 嘅 Senior Fellow 高級嘅學者阿 Charles Burton 先生喺我嘅左手邊，喺我右手邊咧係 Gloria， 係本地知名嘅時事評論員，佢亦都係港加聯嘅會長嚟嘅。咁樣咧就我哋翻嚟嘅時候咧coming back we talk about a lot about the front speech as well, the NDP's position on China. So right now we should go to the Conservative. I researched their website, and it's kind of consistent with Erin O'Toole talks about address about Trudeau's front speech yesterday. In the website, it said Canadian farmers are now paying the price for Justin Trudeau's weak leadership towards the government of Beijing because Canada has already lost Chinese market access for canola and soy, and China has now blocked all meat product export from Canada. So I guess conservative concern about China is more about business, right? Maybe you start, Gloria?
Well, I think regarding the Conservative Party's position on China and Hong Kong, I think our audience can refer to the website of Erin O'Toole, who's the new party leader of the Conservative Party. Now, I have read that the statement posted on the website. My general impression is that basically Erin has outlined the anti-China framework as far as the China foreign policy is concerned. However, he talked about Magnitsky Law, using Magnitsky Law to sanction Chinese and Hong Kong officials if China does not release the two Michaels, right, within a certain period of time after he has become the new government, he has become the prime minister of the new government. However, I have yet to see a very concrete proposal or policy proposal pertaining to China and Hong Kong in addressing to the present critical development in Hong Kong, particularly the mass arrest of civil society organization activists in Hong Kong, and also in addressing to Canadian civil society's urge for a safe harbor program to protect Hong Kongers who are under political persecution, as well as other more flexible comprehensive immigration policies to accommodate Hong Kong people who would like to flee Hong Kong. So I think these are the missing part in his website, in his platform. And I just hope that, later on, when we come to the resumption of the hearing of the Special Committee on Canada-China relations, we'll be able to, see more concrete proposal or echoing of our demands by the Conservative Party. And so I think this is something that has yet to be proven, because quite often to me, as well as to other representatives of the civil society, actions speak much stronger than words. It's just like we are, very dissatisfied with the empty promises, the empty words of deep concern from the Liberal Party. If this is the case with other parties, then basically we'll be equally disappointed. So we expect more concrete proposal and also action to be taken from the various opposition party to hold the Liberal government accountable, to make sure that the present government will provide concrete actions to address to the present crisis.
So how do you make of that, Charles? Especially, you probably know there are some position change concerning human rights in China. in the Conservative Party?
Well, I think that I have had the opportunity to engage with Mr. O'Toole on China, and I found him to be very sympathetic to the rights of people in China, and that there are concerns about the future of Taiwan. I think that there remains a perception in government that in those key ridings where there are significant populations of Chinese Canadians, that most of the Chinese Canadians support the policies of the Chinese Communist Party in relations with Canada and feel that we should be prioritizing trade and Chinese investment and so on. That's, I think that if we expect the government to be more concerned about Hong Kong, then we need a much clearer signal from the 300,000 Canadians of Hong Kong origin living in Canada, and the large number of Canadians in Hong Kong who could vote in the next election, that they expect our government to engage in more forceful response, particularly because the government of Canada endorsed the Sino-British Joint Declaration at the request of both the government of Great Britain and the government of China when it was lodged with the United Nations. So, there's a need for us to counter the misimpression that most Canadians of Chinese origin do not want the Canadian government to speak out on behalf of Hong Kong human rights, and therefore the appeal of calling for a more interest and values-based approach to China is something that's directed mostly at Canadians of non-Chinese origin. So this has been a common misperception. I remember even in the period of the Harper administration for Jason Kenney, this was a source of frustration because they did polling and came up with indications that the community of Canadian Chinese don't want the government to be aggressive and outspoken on the People's Republic of China. So when one looks at political parties who are paying lip service but aren't engaging in concrete proposals, I think that a lot of it has to do with these kinds of internal discussions relating to electoral politics and relating to fundraising from Canadian corporations more than we're aware of. And there has to be a reason why our governments are being so reluctant to address the Chinese threat, and why we're so far behind our allies, despite the relatively small amount of our external trade which goes to China, about 4%, as opposed to 75% in the United States. And I think it's because of these internal political processes that we still haven't been able to challenge sufficiently.
I agree with Charles' points, right? In your analysis of the the participation level or the voting rate of those non-mainland Chinese Canadians within the Chinese Canadian community. I think the voting rate has historically been very low. I think it's only around 26%. But I think ever since last year, a lot of the Hong Kong Canadian organizations, as well as other diverse community organizations, have realized that in order to exert enough pressure on the various federal parties, not just the Liberal parties, but on various Liberal parties, to make sure that they listen to our voices, is really to increase our voting rates in various ridings, particularly in the ridings, the swing vote ridings, so that they understand they need to listen to our demands, they also need to understand our concerns. I think when I talk about this, I think we shouldn't underestimate the influx or the wave of return immigrants from Hong Kong following the implementation of the national security law. I have been in the real estate business, and I have been traveling to Hong Kong very frequently to meet with clients there. Based on my contacts with many of my, many of the Hong Kong people or Canadians in Hong Kong, I think there's a very strong urge for them to return to Canada, probably in the next half year to 1 year. So I think we should not underestimate this wave of return Canadians from Hong Kong. And those people who return are mostly people who do not side with the Chinese policy in Hong Kong. And then, in addition to that, there's also urge for Hong Kong people to seek immigration opportunities in Canada. So that's why if we can come up with a more flexible or tailor-made immigration policy to address to the existing crisis in Hong Kong, I'm quite sure, the demographics of the Chinese Canadian community will be changed in the next 1 year or two.
Okay, so before we go to the next topic, maybe I just mentioned a little bit about the Green Party, because it is also an opposition. They didn't have much talk about China, but the most recent one is in July. They're calling on the government of Canada to demand that the United States drop criminal charges against Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou and withdraw its extradition request so that Canada can release her. I think this is a little bit ridiculous. Probably we don't need a lot of time to talk about it, but I just mentioned it. Maybe both of you have a little bit of discussion about it. Maybe.
Well, I would say that there is a tendency to use China as a counter to strong anti-American feelings among a significant portion of the Canadian left. So, this has been traditionally a concern that Canada is over-dependent on the U.S. economy, and therefore we should transfer more of our economic activity to China, thereby better balancing the U.S. I think that, this does go back to other aspects in the discussion that we've just had. The bottom line is that most, and correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the Canadian Chinese politicians have been inclined to be supportive of the mainland, and to have, often we discover that they visit China and have connections with the Chinese Communist Party's United Front Work Department. We've seen a number of cases of this, not to speak of, some non-Chinese politicians who have extensive connections, such as the former Liberal cabinet minister, John McCallum, who had received $73,000 worth of travel benefits to visit China and been there quite a lot, and who has family resident in China and so on. So, from that point of view, you do have a lot of persons who are influential in the Chinese community who seem to be supportive of Chinese government purposes, and they seem to be able to get a lot of funding for their political campaigns, which appear to be connected one way or another to China. The Chinese media that's consumed by so many of the Chinese language speakers in Canada is increasingly supportive of a pro-China Canada policy. So for myself, I watch the mainland media, the television like the Xinwen Lianbo, but I also read Wen Shecheng and Duowei Xinwen. And I've noticed in recent years that these outlets have become more and more sympathetic to Chinese purposes, not to speak of Mingbao or Xingdao Ribao. Sorry to speak in Mandarin, my Cantonese is terrible. But that the kind of media atmosphere for Canadians who prefer the Chinese language to get their information on the internet is inclined to support the Chinese government's agenda here. So it's very challenging for us to counter the massive effort to gain the hearts and minds of persons of Chinese origin in our country, and very difficult for our government to deal with in terms of sussing out foreign funding for Canadian Chinese media, or allegations, for example, that advertisers will not place advertisements in media which are not as supportive of the Chinese government at the behest of the Chinese embassy, and all of the other massively funded United Front work activities, including psychological manipulation that equates any criticism of the Chinese Communist Party as being fanhua, anti-Chinese, anti-ethnic Chinese. So, we're clearly facing a considerable challenge here, and I do think that work by Gloria and the others is important. But the bottom line is that we still haven't been able to achieve our goals of convincing the Canadian government to stand up for Hong Kong and to stand up for the rights of people in China. So, we can't downplay the challenge that faces us in this kind of work. And as I alluded to, the Hong Kong security law is a significant challenge. For someone like Gloria to visit Hong Kong, to engage in her real estate business at this time, is, in my view, a high risk activity that could result in imprisonment in China. We can't rule this possibility out. We haven't seen it yet, but I think it may be to come.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe media, maybe a little bit off topic, but it is very important for us. Maybe at least I'm not sure, but maybe CBC can help somehow. If there is an RCI channel that speak Mandarin, and then maybe the government can fund a channel speaking Cantonese or Mandarin to tell the Chinese community in here about the values of Canada, about another opinion on China, things like that. Maybe.
Well, I would
Gloria?
like to concur. I would like to elaborate on what Charles mentioned about the Chinese language media in Canada. I think based on my observation and also data collection from various sources, particularly from various journalists over the past 2 decades, I think I would say majority of the Chinese language community newspapers, as well as media organizations, are directly or indirectly under the Chinese embassy or Chinese Communist Party's undue influence. And one of the latest news I've heard about, and probably is yet to happen, probably in the near future, is the taking over of the Xingtao Group by a state corporation from China.
Mm-hmm.
And they are going to take over the entire group in Hong Kong. Xingtao in Hong Kong is a publicly listed company. And one of the conditions for this takeover is that Xingtao Group in Hong Kong has to acquire back the Xingtao Group in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So they have already started to this process of taking over Xingtao Group in Canada from Torstar, and the auditing has been going on. It's just that I don't know exactly when the transaction will be closed. But if that ever happens, that means Xingtao will become another, red media in Canada. Mingpao is already on the CCP side for a long, long time. And many of the so-called Chinese TV stations, they are already subtly leaning towards the Chinese Communist Party by not reporting so much on Hong Kong issues. And some of the TV station management level even gave order asking the reporter to not to conduct interview with me specifically. So they have already gone that far, and they are not abiding by some of the journalistic principles laid down by CRTC. So I think this is an area that CRTC as well as our government need to look into, because this is a reflection of how serious the undue foreign influence is exemplifying itself, right, in our media sector or in our community sector when we talk about the United Front organizations. So I think it's a very systemic problem, and it really, I think it's worth our governments conducting a comprehensive study on different fronts to see how the foreign influence has exemplified itself on Canadian soil. Otherwise, I think the hope for a government to change their policy will be very slim.
Okay, we have 10 minutes left. Maybe I go to our final topic. We know that the Liberal government is changing the Chinese policy, especially when after Chrysler Freeland become finance minister, and it seems that her position change will also change the Liberal government's position on China. So right now she is kind of like the deputy prime minister as well, the second most important, holding the second most important position in the cabinet. So what are we going to look at in the future? Like the Liberal is going to change towards the China, and especially like is there anything resistant within the party or things like that? Charles, maybe you start first.
Well, I think that for a long time within cabinets, the conservative cabinets and the Liberal cabinets, there has been a split on approach to China. And, you have elements who are more concerned about protecting the interests of Canadian business, who have potential opportunities in the Chinese market and encouraging Chinese investment in Canada. We remember the Sinnock-Nixon affair, and later the ACON. A lot of the discussion within cabinet was split. And so I think a lot of us have a great deal of appreciation for Chrysler Freeland. She comes from a Ukrainian background, and therefore has perhaps a closer and more sophisticated knowledge of the nature of Chinese of communist parties and how they function and the threat that they present to liberal democracies. So unfortunately, when she was foreign minister, I think that her own views on China were not able to come into full play because the China file seemed to be managed largely out of the Prime Minister's office. But as time goes on, and if in a future government Ms. Freeland assumes the prime ministership, then we might start to see a China policy that will be more concerned about Canada's short, medium, and long-term interests, and that under Chrysler Freeland would get more into compliance with the approach to China that we're increasingly seeing among our like-minded allies not just the United States, but in Europe and Australia and New Zealand. So, I think that it's a dynamic situation, but as Gloria has emphasized, we cannot pretend that Chinese influence and co-optation of elites is not going on. And, we could even be looking at situations akin to a form of blackmail where the Chinese regime has information about key policymakers that they would threaten to reveal if those policymakers adopted positions that the Chinese government doesn't find friendly. All of this reporting about massive downloads of personnel files that we've been seeing recently suggests that the Chinese government is using that kind of information to further its purposes in countries like Canada. And so, basically the authoritarian one-party Chinese communist system is able to take advantage of our open and free societies, our naivete and our greed to achieve their ends. And I think from that point of view, they're being quite successful. So, I agree. I think Ms. Freeland probably gets this better than most people, but unfortunately, she's not a determining factor in the government, but only one contributing voice.
Gloria?
Yeah, I think last year during the SNC Lavalin scandal, a U.S. newspaper reported that Freeland had discussed with the Liberal Party's treasurer that if Trudeau resigned, she might be prepared to lead the party. And of course, she denied the rumor afterwards. But since then, several newspapers have published editorials and op-eds declaring that she would be the best new Liberal leader. And I agree with that, because as a seasoned former journalist and activist, Freeland possesses comprehensive knowledge and experience of communist governments. And she also knows how to deal with complicated international trade and foreign affairs challenges. Domestically, she's also the chief government negotiator with provinces, and she's able to gain the trust and respect of provincial leaders. So that would make her a strong prime minister. However, I think her major challenge is that she's not seen to be a member of the old boys club of the Liberal Party. So her, running for leadership campaign could be blocked by some of the old, the China-friendly old guards of the Liberal Party. So that is something we need to monitor very closely.
Okay, so I guess there would be a fight between the old guards and the new generation, which Chrysler Freeland is leading the new generation, and then probably they are looking forward to after the next election, if they get the majority, they would have 4 years to settle the argument, and then they will do the real change of generation, and let Chrysler Freeland to get the prime ministership. Even though that would be possible that the old guards will stop her from doing that. Is it an exact assessment about Liberal Party right now?
Well, I think that certainly the Chinese government would probably not like to see Chrysler Freeland as Prime Minister of Canada. It's my speculation. But I think, like with all of this sort of stuff, we really have to follow the money and see where the influence is spreading. And I found to my disappointment that politicians in Canada, who I previously thought were supportive of Canadian values and were not amenable to approaches from foreign governments or benefits being accrued to them, in fact, in the end, are ending up becoming wealthy based on on some foreign connections, and it seems that China is often in the background. So I don't know about the generational split or whether, the younger generation of politicians are less amenable to Chinese approaches than the older generations. You would just hope that politicians would want to serve the interests of Canada and retire on their government pensions when they finished, instead of feeling that they haven't been receiving enough financial reward as politicians, and therefore anticipate opportunities to become very much wealthier once they leave office, based on concessions that they may have made to agents of the Chinese regime while they were in policy-making positions. So, continuing story. I'm hoping that we're going to see some good news as a greater consensus forms to understand the true nature of the China challenge and what Canada has to do to meet it in a way which serves our interests and values.
Any extra comment about it, Gloria?
Yeah, I fully agree with what Charles said. I think it really takes collaborations between the civil society organizations, as well as some of the progressive and members of various federal parties, to work together to make positive change happen in our foreign policy towards China and Hong Kong. And so we are ready. We are prepared to do so. And that's why over the past 1 year, Canada Hong Kong Link, together with other Hong Kong Canadian organizations, as well as organizations from a very diverse community, such as the Uyghur, Tibetan, Taiwanese, and also Vietnamese, etc. We've been working very closely together to work on the various federal parties to make sure that our voices are heard in the parliament.
Okay, so it is today's program. Okay, I'm sorry that I didn't let Charles Burton to show off his Mandarin, because my Mandarin is not very good. So yeah, hopefully next time I can do that, first of all. So 時間差唔多啦。如果大家對我哋呢個禮拜嘅討論咧有進一步意見咧，可以喺 Facebook 咧搜尋離地 News LAYDAYNEWS 一個字咧，就揾到我哋個 page 噶啦。咁我哋呢個節目咧，每逢星期四多倫多時間晚上6點半到7點半咧，即係香港時間星期五早上6點半到7點半咧，喺離地民主後援嘅 YouTube 頻道直播嘅。離地民主後援啱咧都開咗個 Patreon， 就俾我哋咧就若果我哋呢啲節目可以提早錄嘅話咧 ，which is not this one。咁就我哋可以提早半日咧俾大家聽，我哋都會有一啲嘅突發嘅評論咧會喺上面嘅，咁歡迎大家去 Patreon 就查詢啦。咁樣咧就另外一方面咧，我哋都有一啲社交媒體嘅，我哋嘅 Facebook 啦、Twitter 啦、Instagram 啦同嘅 handle 咧，其實全部都一樣 ，Patreon 都係就係 Lady TV LAYDAY TV 噶。我哋同時喺各大 podcast app 即係 iTunes、Apple Podcast、Google Podcast 同埋呢個 Spotify 咧提供聲音版本噶。呢期離地新聞咧係2020年嘅9月24號咧晏晝3點，亦都係香港時間嘅9月25號啦，應該係早上嘅3點咧係錄影嘅。下星期再見，拜拜。
再見。
再見。